JFK, A Time Remembered. Next on PBS.
The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes, but these images remain forever in the memory of almost every American who was living in the fall of 1963. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was saluted for the last time by his family, his friends, and the people he had led for 2 years, 10 months, and 2 days.
I can remember Bobby once saying to me, well, he's going to be so young when he's finished his second term. What is he going to do then? And I said, well, the world's going to be a different place then. And then it was all snatched away from us.
We tend to romanticize a little bit, I think. Times past. To be truly honest, I don't think we could ever half romanticize what might really have been had he lived. It could have been a glorious period in our history.
There was the sense of John Kennedy when he was alive. It wasn't the sense of greatness about him. It was the sense of potential greatness. Now that's pretty exciting, and it made the country exciting. And John Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy and the whole Kennedy administration brought with them a sense of not only hope, not only great potential, maybe even a destiny for greatness, but they brought with them excitement, energy, style, sense of humor. So when all of that ended in one terrible flash with the president's death, this made the mourning all the deeper.
For me, a lot of light went out of the world, you know? It just wasn't quite as bright, it wasn't quite as warm, wasn't quite as much fun, wasn't quite as challenging to me. Kennedy, he added a lot. And I think had his life not been cut short, he would have been one of the great presidents of all time.
Larry O'Brien was with the president the morning of November 22nd, 1963.
There was, as I recall it, a breakfast meeting to take place and an outdoor event across from the hotel. in a big open area. And I went in to visit the president, and he was looking out the window down at this open area where they were putting the finishing touches on the platform and all the rest of it. And he made the comment to me, they talk about security and protecting you. But he said, look at this. If somebody wants to get you, they can always do it.
The President and Mrs. Kennedy arrived in Dallas at 11:38 Central Standard Time. In less than 1 hour, the President would be mortally wounded. Tom Wicker was covering the President's trip for the New York Times.
There was a big crowd at the Dallas airport, and the president, as he did in those days, or as any president does, he worked the fence, and shook hands with the crowd. And though we had all been warned that there might be trouble, of course, what one anticipated was demonstrators or maybe somebody threw an egg or something of that sort, None of that transpired, and I don't even remember any hostile signs. There probably were some, but I don't recall them from that day. And you have to remember that in the fall of 1963, the polls showed President Kennedy's popularity down. He'd had some defeats, suffered some defeats as president and so forth. And he was not, at that time, the popular idol that we may remember today.
He had the top down in Dallas. I think that was I know that was a sense he had that in order to really make the most out of travels as a president, why you had to be observed by the people, that the people saw you, they'd be likely to vote for you in the next election because they would feel that they too were part of history, part of that administration. So I think the top was down as a political ploy to get people to support him in 1964, because I think he cared very much about getting reelected.
Dan Rather was in Dallas on assignment for CBS News.
Our plan was at various places along the motorcade in Dallas, film would be dropped off by our crew in the motorcade, and we had pre-designated film drops along the motorcade route. And I went to one of those film drop places, in fact, what was supposed to be the last one. And we had a pre-designated place, for those who may know the area, just past the railroad tracks. Those tracks were just past the grassy knoll, just past the school book depository.
I rode in the car behind the president. I rode in the car with the Secret Service. And now they had come on the car, the running boards on the car I'm in, because we're just about to make the turn. And I had always been conscious of the president's time, and I'm riding with Ken O'Donnell, who was the appointment secretary. And I looked at my watch and I said, Kenny, how far away are we from the Trade Mart where he was due to speak at 12:30? And Kenny said, it's only about 5 minutes away. And I'm looking at my watch and I said, that's great. We'll only be a few minutes late.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the Trade Mart. I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see them. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
Suddenly, shots were fired. And my initial reaction was to say to the driver, what was that? And he said, I don't know, perhaps it's a 21-gun salute. But the motorcade started to move out rapidly. You could see the president's car and Clint Hill grasping the rear trunk, and off we went. And of course, I have no idea whether the president or anyone has been harmed, but you have at least a feeling that indeed shots had been fired.
I was sitting on the press bus, I think on the second press bus, with a local reporter from Texas. And he observed this, the people running and so forth, and he dashed up to the front of the bus and then came back to me and he said, something's happened. He said the president's car just sped away. He says they just gunned it away.
Parkland Hospital, there has been a shooting. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound. I repeat, a shooting in the motorcade in the downtown area.
We're talking about only a few seconds here, but in those few seconds, I remember, wait a minute, the motorcade has taken a wrong turn here. The motorcade was supposed to go more or less straight ahead. It didn't. The motorcade took the right slant of the Y, if you will. The motorcade seemed to be moving very fast. There seemed to be something wrong. I went back over the railroad tracks, and as soon as I went over the crest of the railroad tracks and got to the top of the grassy knoll, there was a scene I'll never forget. There were people screaming. There was great confusion. Keep in mind that I had heard no shots. I didn't know what was wrong. I only knew that something appeared to be very wrong. In retrospect, perhaps I should have, right then and there, started talking to people and asking people questions, but I didn't. I said, something's happened here. And so I began running, flat out running, just sprinting as hard as I could, the 4 blocks to our station.
Tell us exactly what you saw, sir. He was coming down the street, and my 5-year-old boy and myself were by ourselves on the grass there on Commerce Street, and I asked Joe to wave to him, and Joe waved, and I waved, and the man... That's all right, sir. You go ahead and tell me. As he was waving back, he was the shot rang out, and he slumped down in the seat, and his wife reached up toward him, and as he was slumping down, and the second shot went off, and it just knocked him down from the seat. 2 shots? 2 shots. Did you see the man who did this? No, sir, I did not see the man who did it. All I did was look in the man's face when he was shot there and saw that expression on his face and grab himself and slide. And the second one, whenever it went, why, I'm positive it had hit him. I hope it didn't, but I'm positive that it hit him, and he went all the way down in the car. Then they speeded up, and I didn't know what was going on, so I just grabbed the boy and fell on him in hopes that there wasn't a maniac around. I'm sorry. I can't help you more, but I won't forget it.
The presidential limousine reached Parkland Hospital 6 minutes after the shooting.
Clint Hill, myself, and another agent lifted the president on the stretcher, and with Jackie running beside us, we raced into the trauma room at the hospital.
When we crowded into the hospital, Mrs. Kennedy and Mrs. Connolly were standing there. John Connolly's wife, the governor of Texas, who was in the car with the president. And it was understood that she was going to an upper floor of the hospital, which I construed to mean that John Connolly had been hit. However, that was true, but I didn't recognize why Jack Kennedy wasn't being moved to the operating level of the hospital.
There was mostly hysteria, disbelief. It is hard to adequately frame the words that can describe that scene. It was as if the life had ebbed away from everybody, and we were going on sheer adrenaline, trying to live out the next hour and hoping and praying that the president was alive and would recover, and that all that we had dreaded was not going to happen.
It was such a terrible blow to one's sense of the possible. You know, the feeling that the most powerful man in the world had been struck down. You couldn't believe that this had happened. In a sense, it was as if our country had been struck down in a way. We just, it was very hard to take in, and not only very hard to realize, but once you did let that realization seep into your consciousness, it was a very emotional experience.
Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff was shuttling between the location of the vice president in the hospital quarters and where we were. And he was anxious to have something to report to the press. I don't think we were capable, Ken O'Donnell and I, of articulating anything. And we just brushed Kilduff off a couple of times, and he came back, of course, under tremendous pressure.
Shots had been fired at the president's motorcade. The president himself perhaps had been hit. And it was very clear that he'd been taken to Parkland Hospital. So I got on the telephone and tried to get through to Parkland Hospital. I did that quickly because I knew, well, listen, if whatever's happened, if the president's motorcade's gone to Parkland Hospital, this is a big story. And the telephone lines began to get crowded to Parkland, so I'd better get in there and quickly as I can. And I did get through to Parkland Hospital. And the switchboard operator was not panicked, but not calm. And, very quickly told me that the president, it was her understanding that the president had been shot and was perhaps dead. And I'll never forget her saying that. And I followed up with that and tried to eventually talk to one of the doctors and eventually talk to a priest at the hospital, both of whom said that the president was dead, but nobody had said this officially.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed Mr. Kennedy. She called, "Oh no," the motorcade sped on. United Press says that the wounds for President Kennedy perhaps could be fatal.
All during this time, Jackie was so brave. She was sitting there in a blood-stained suit, and every now and then she'd go into the room and then come back, and we sat around and prayed, expecting the worst but hoping for the best. And then at 1 o'clock Texas time, he was pronounced dead.
President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. Slow it down. I have no other details regarding the assassination of the president.
Anything about the shooting? Shooter, sniper?
No, we have no information on that.
Was Mrs. Kennedy hit?
Mrs. Kennedy was not hit.
Was Connolly hit?
Governor Connolly was hit.
Was Vice President Connolly hit?
The Vice President was not hit. From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded.
Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
The President of the United States is dead. President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The President is dead.
He is dead of bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. Of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us.
Oh, I think everyone knows just what they were doing at that time. I know I was in my basement ironing, and I had the radio on. And it came on the radio. I couldn't believe it. I put the iron down and ran out in the street to see if anybody else was going up and down the street that I could talk to. And then everybody seemed to come out. And it was such a shock.
There was a great deal of pandemonium on campus. People running to the telephones, people dismissing the class, people crying all over campus, as if everybody's closest relative, lover, beloved one had died.
There was this very strange presence, just quiet. And I went up to one of the doctors, and now I knew Kennedy had been shot, but I didn't know what had happened. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, President Kennedy's dead. I thought, that can't be. He can't be dead. He's John Kennedy. He can't be dead. He's Superman. He's special. But people were watching TV, and they were showing the car and Parkland Hospital, and there was just this, it was a real loss, the loneliness, a sense of like disbelief. And people were just talking. It was quiet. Everything came to a halt.
And as we rode along, each announcement was worse than the last. And I told the pilot, I said, let's just turn around and let's go back to Jacksonville. I can't go on this vacation. I've got to go back. So we turned around and we landed. I took the earphones off and didn't listen anymore. And shocked beyond my ability to tell it. And when we got to the Jacksonville airport, I walked in. There was a large crowd of people there, and they had the television set on, and there was all kinds of people, probably 300 or 400, glued to this television. And as I walked in, why, a lot of people knew me. It was my own state. They said, isn't it terrible? And I said, well, what's happened? They said, well, he's dead. So I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I came on back to Washington, and that was it.
The White House was a terrible place that afternoon. The first period, we knew he'd been shot. We didn't know how bad. We knew it was bad, but nobody knew how bad. I remember the building feeling as if everyone in it was lost, looking for the comfort of a chance to talk to someone else. I came to think, later, looking back on it, that I was perhaps luckier than some because there was the immediate work of taking care of the needs of the incoming president. That was kind of therapeutic. But the main feeling was simply one of a building whose most vital presence, whose leader and a great president, a great human being, and a friend was gone.
Now, they've found the rifle with which the president was apparently shot. It had a telescopic sight, would have had such accuracy from the 5th floor. It had one shell left in the chamber. They found 3 more spent shells nearby, just husks of rifle bullets.
Less than 1 hour after President Kennedy's death was confirmed, a suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, was arrested in Dallas.
Oswald, did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. You have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't. I've just been... Where back you want to go?
Oswald's arrest did not allay fears of a larger plot against the government.
Meanwhile, no one has any idea of the circumstances. No one can be sure that the vice president isn't the target. And their objective was to move the body of the president to the airport and back home. And that objective was being stymied, or attempts were being made to stymie it, by, I believe, a coroner and others, some local officials. And it became somewhat of a scene. Finally, we pushed aside the local officials, literally, advised them we were moving the body out, which we did, and with Jackie, those of us directly involved, we moved to a remote corner of Love Field, and we tried over this long flight of stairs, the Secret Service and others moved the casket out of the plane, strap it in that process. One of the handles of the casket was broken, I guess, but it wasn't an easy thing to do. And then Jackie, Ken O'Donnell, Dave Powers, and I sat opposite the casket. The plane was not taking off, and we made inquiry. The delay was the president's desire, the new president's desire, to have a Texas judge who was en route to the airport swear him in.
Now, what people don't understand is, I didn't at the time, that you don't have to take an oath of office to be president. If you're the vice president, on the immediate death of the president, you become the chief executive officer. But Lyndon Johnson knew something about symbolism. He realized that the world was shattered, so he was trying to demonstrate that the country would go on.
And now came that long ride back. We sat with Jackie. And she talked about how much he loved the trip to Ireland and how she wished she could have gone. And he was telling her that she would have these cadets to perform for the president in Ireland, perform at the funeral. And I was so proud of her that she was holding us together. And I remember at one time she said, "What will you do now, Dave? You were with him for all these years." And I never felt so bad about anything in all my life.
We were on the air talking, and Air Force One arrived, and I saw them, they were all confused as far as I was concerned. They weren't doing it the right way. And instead of opening the front door of Air Force One, they were opening the back door, and they had a hydraulic lift there. And of course, they were taking the body out the back door in a casket.
It was a stark scene because it was devoid of ceremony. It was starkly real, really almost ugly in its reality. And there were no speeches, no words. It was purely functional and mechanical to see the coffin go into a vehicle, Mrs. Kennedy put in a car. Not a word was said by anybody. And all I can tell you is that it was one of the lowest points of that weekend, and probably in anybody's lives, to have gone through that, I say, ugly scene.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
The whole house moved as if we were all in a dream sequence. There was very little noise. You heard people talking to each other, comforting each other. But there was very, very little noise. The White House is usually just full of activity and people, and you hear sounds, and people were walking on tiptoe. Mrs. Kennedy decided on the major points of what was going to happen, and she wanted to follow protocol, and she wanted to follow history as it had occurred in Abraham Lincoln's funeral.
The next day, many members of the administration were invited to the White House. President Kennedy lay in state in the East Room, and my memory isn't so much of the coffin on the catafalque as it is of Robert Kennedy, who was in the receiving line with two of his sisters when I came. I don't think I'd ever seen human pain that was so intense expressed in someone's face that way. It was though he himself had been mortally wounded. And of course he had been in part by the president's death because they were so close. And the grief and the torment of that never left Robert Kennedy throughout his life. I can remember in subsequent times, for example, months later, it was not unusual, having worked late at the Justice Department, for Bobby to say, let's go to the cemetery. And we would go to Arlington and climb across a wall and walk that long distance to the grave, and the sentry there knew Robert Kennedy. And Bobby would kneel and pray. It was just something that was with him constantly.
Kennedy's loss was not just the loss of a president, but it was the loss of a friend, particular to blacks. And he was the man who got my attention politically. It was because of him I registered to vote and to participate in a presidential campaign in 1960. So all of that was going through my mind. And as I stood at the White House on that Saturday, as dignitaries came from Earl Warren, who wrote the unanimous decision in the Brown versus the Board of Education, which sort of outlawed segregation and opened things up. And I watched as a fellow who was with him, George Wallace, here were two extremes, two men from opposite ends of the political spectrum visiting, paying their last respects to John Kennedy. It had a kind of choking emotion with me, and you wonder what would happen now.
remember one moment I walked outside and went down in the alleyway along the West Wing. And as I was standing there, they were bringing Kennedy's chair, his rocking chair, out. This was Saturday morning. It was the rain. And a few minutes later, they came from the EOB with a saddle on a mount, which obviously belonged to Lyndon Johnson. Well, power changes very quickly and very brutally in Washington. And I'll never forget the exchange of those two pieces of furniture within a 20-minute period, and life goes on.
Throughout Saturday night, workers prepared the Capitol, where the president would lie in state.
There were 11 chiefs of state. Nobody stood on ceremony. Nobody cared who went before or after. The ranks, the privileges. Every head of state who came and every head of delegation wanted to, of course, interact with Mrs. Kennedy and to express their homage and their salute to our fallen leader. I must tell you one poignant story. When we had gone in a happy time, a wonderful time, to Buckingham Palace, she asked my advice as to whether or not she should curtsy to the Queen. And I said, well, now, chiefs of state and wives of chiefs of state do not go around curtsying to one another. No. So on the day of the funeral, when Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, comes to her, she did drop a little curtsy to him, and she turned to me and she said, Angie, I'm no longer the wife of a chief of state. I promise you, I nearly broke down.
All through that weekend, I think, like the nation, Washington was stunned and almost beyond grief, and those who had close personal feelings for President Kennedy, or anyway identified with his government, congregated in small groups in Washington. And I remember with this group talking, and the words of Walt Whitman's poem, My Captain, coming back to my mind. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My captain does not hear my voice, he has no pulse or will. Exult, O shore, ring out, O bells, but I with mournful tread will walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Although the Lincoln obsequies had taken place almost a century before, there were so many echoes of that terrible sadness that the country must have felt when Abraham Lincoln fell, in terms of the mortal wounding of John Kennedy. To add to the trauma of that incredible series of days, there suddenly was the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald. that took place in front of us. Jack Ruby murdering him. I mean, it was a scene without parallel, certainly in the history of American television and probably in American history.
They were taking the casket to Lion State at the Capitol, and I thought it was interesting that we started walking down the driveway of the White House behind it, and I don't think any of us, a big bunch of reporters, people, I don't think any of us had any idea of walking all the way. We just kept on walking. We just followed it and walked all the way to the Capitol, which is quite some distance.
All I could do was do the work in front of me and not think about how I personally felt about what had happened. For me, there was a delayed reaction with that didn't take full effect until sometime the next week, when I finally had some time away from the story. But it hit the nation very, very hard that weekend. There's been nothing like it in my lifetime before or since, and I don't expect there will be. I think it was something unique in our history, partly because of television.
Somehow I think television, at least the ones who stayed with it, because remember, there was one network that did some football games on Sunday. The networks, though, together really elevated this tragedy into a moment of great dignity for the nation. And I think it was the first time I was awestruck by television. The next time was when a man landed on the moon. But it was the weekend of John F. Kennedy's assassination, and what television did then really made me regard television with wonderment that it had this power.
The country was held together, I think, more than by any other thing, by Mrs. Kennedy. Her nobility, her strength, her courage meant so much to everyone. I mean, whatever the grief anyone felt, it certainly no one was entitled to feel more grief than she. And if she could endure it, and if she could handle the trauma of the events, and hold her head up and look into the world and hold her children's hands and give that kind of strength to everyone around her, I think the nation just took that strength from her through the television screen, and it made an enormous difference. She just expressed in a way that was eloquent without words, that one could be grief-stricken so profoundly and yet understand that the responsibilities of life had to go on.
I can always remember as he laid in the rotunda there, the literally hundreds of thousands of people that came through 24 hours a day. They couldn't even shut down the Capitol. Billy and I are standing there. My son Tommy came along. He was a student at Boston College. And Tommy, what are you doing? He said, I bummed a ride down, Daddy. He said, I couldn't just see Jack Kennedy put to rest, he said. Without coming down, he had 3 or 4 of his pals with him. It was one of the saddest days in our life.
Touched the common person. He really, I think, cared about people and we felt cared about everybody. Nobody's come along since then, and maybe that coupled with the fact that, yeah, I'm not going to let this happen again. Presidents do get shot, and we obviously know that now. So you're going to be a little more careful. Not going to spend a weekend like that crying anymore. Not going to wake up saying this isn't real. Not going to go to bed crying. Not going to let it happen again.
Well, what hit you was the fact that such a young, vibrant person was struck down at the prime of his life. And as you would think of a neighbor as a friend, you saw his lovely young wife and 2 orphan children. You got the same feeling of horror, that why should somebody be wiped out of such a wonderful life that he may have had ahead of him, and look at his family that he's leaving behind.
everything else that day in November of 1963, there were so many emotions that flooded forward to so many of us personally and out of really the nation's psyche and interior of absolute shock, amazement, depression, and, yes, embarrassment, humiliation, and shame. That a president had been assassinated. This was the sort of thing that happened in Balkan countries. This is the kind of thing that happened in other places. This did not happen in the United States of America. Now, part of what was set loose that day, I think, part of what changed was the recognition that we were indeed a violent society. Like so many societies before us, you can say, well, how could you have gone through 2 world wars and the assassinations, previous presidents, and not known that you were a violent society? I can only say that that was not the image we had of ourselves. It was not the picture we had of ourselves. And that picture changed. We grew up. I think a lot of us grew up with the assassination of President Kennedy. I think in many ways the country grew up.
Something happened in the world that day for those of us of that generation, at least, that we had not believed could happen, you see. And that does change things. But as far as the just the course of world events, nuclear arms control and all that sort of thing, I'm not sure that that it would made that much difference. And I expect, I feel rather sure that if President Kennedy could come back and answer that question with that self-deprecating air that he had, I think he would have said, no, it wouldn't have made that much difference.
With him went a time of possibilities. And it's so easy, after the fact, to cast aspersions and doubts. But the inner spirit that was that he had so strongly, what that has cost us as a nation since. With him, you always could believe in the 9th inning home run, in winning the 5th set at Wimbledon, in making a 3.5-minute mile, in having all the children in the country be able to read, write, and paint, and dance, and know everything that the world could know, to be able to speak many languages, to be part of one world that had a positive look for the next 3, 4, 5 decades. Positive attitude, I think, if you had to boil it down. With hope, with clarity, with intelligence, with compassion, and with an immensely broad view of history and an understanding of people.
Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
It's amazing to think how a few seconds can affect the course of history and the course of a nation.